It's not often we see a creator stay with the same series for as long as Hideo Kojima stayed with Metal Gear Solid. Since its conception from all the way back in 1987 to its final installment in 2015, Kojima worked almost non-stop on the series. And this longevity is a rare occurrence across the video game landscape, which sees popular IPs change hands between directors and publishers, perhaps too often. This naturally makes Kojima and his Metal Gear series such a shiny curiosity for academics, because it's easier to track the evolving philosophies of an artist when they're writing scenarios for the same set of characters for almost 30 years. It's even easier when there is an abundance of supporting literature surrounding their creations as well, of which Metal Gear Solid most definitely has. Even after dismissing all of the art books and guides and behind-the-scenes documentaries, there is still a wealth of peculiar supporting literature, mostly in Japanese, that accompanies each installment. It's clear that Kojima's love for movie culture extended to behind-the-scenes content as well, as each game saw the release of fully published scripts in the forms of scenario books filled with director commentaries, military files documenting the research that went into Battlefield's technologies and procedures, as well as numerous written essays by both Kojima himself and other guest celebrities. But what this Japanese literature really offers is a slightly different perspective on Kojima as a creator, probably due to the absence of the usual clunky third-party translator, where he tends to become more introspective when describing his creations. In his later years, it's clear that Kojima becomes very self-aware of his darker components and how this overflows into his creative process. What comes out the other side is a science fiction series riddled with complicated characters, each boasting a set of childhood traumas that eerily mirror Kojima's, which he himself acknowledges in 2004 about the halfway point in his career. In the book titled Metal Gear Solid Naked, Kojima discusses the impact of his father's death on his storytelling. My father died when I was in the 8th grade, so I haven't gotten over my father's complex. So all the games I've finished so far have been about paternity. They're simply games about killing one's father. And when tracking this across the series, Kojima is right. The father figure of each story does perish, but it's only around 2004 when he begins to talk about it, which might be due to having just worked on a Metal Gear entry set in 1964, exactly a year after Kojima's birth and smack bang in the middle of the Cold War, the era of conflict which marked the beginning of Kojima taking on his father's great complex, as he called it, which he goes on to expand on during an interview with Edge magazine. My parents were born in the 1930s and experienced the war. My father used to tell me stories about the bombing of Tokyo, how he was running the streets searching for shelter from the bombs and fires. He told me he carried wounded children to safe places. His stories had a tremendous impact on me. He was too young to join the army, but he had wanted to join the Navy and fight for his country. He even carried the Navy's uniform occasionally. At the same time, he was opposed to the war. He lost a lot of friends and could see all the terror and suffering the war brought down on Japan. It was like walking a tightrope. I believe that I share this tightrope ambiguity with my father. Walking this tightrope between the disgust for war and desire for a war hero was the burden Hideo's father would pass down to his son. Hideo was 13 when his father died, leaving behind an empty void in the heart of Kojima. But this wasn't the end of the line. As we're about to discover, Kojima would attempt to fill that void with a revenge mission in an attempt to rid himself of his father's complex. And he would do this by developing an entire set of stories centered around destroying a character who shared his father's same cursed belief system, Big Boss. In the first Metal Gear in 1987, the character of Big Boss was the commander-in-chief of the entire operation, providing guidance to the new rookie operative, Solid Snake, whose mission it was to infiltrate the enemy fortress and neutralize the nuclear weapon, Metal Gear. While not explained through any in-game text, Hideo described Big Boss in the user manual as a legendary war hero, having spent time serving in the Green Berets, the SAS, and the GSG-9 before eventually founding the fictional Foxhound unit. In this first story, dialogue was thin, with only a few lines devoted to any real character development. But this didn't lessen the impact the great twist had on the community when it was revealed that Big Boss was the big bad in the end. When meeting him for the first time face to face at the climax of the story, his dialogue was sparse but memorable. "I won't die for nothing, you die with me." But of course, for a young 24-year-old Kojima starting out in video game design, this pinpoint scenario might have been subconsciously designed, as this project wasn't one he structured for himself, but one he reluctantly accepted from the higher-ups at Konami, who desired to create a war game with a war hero at its center, a perfect game for the modern landscape, as the Cold War, while winding down at this point in 1987, was still ongoing. In the document titled Metal Gear Solid Shedding, the interviewer summarizes parts of his conversation with Hideo. When Kojima was a boy, his father showed him anti-war movies, and in his own childlike way, Kojima sometimes felt doubts about the war. Continuing with, having felt the absurdity of war as a child, Kojima says that when he was entrusted with Metal Gear for the MSX2, he hated it from the inside. And sure enough, in the end, Big Boss dies at the hands of the hero, Solid Snake.
"You're not a kid anymore. You can call your own shots."
Contrast this first climax with Big Boss against the very last scene Kojima ever worked on for the Metal Gear series 28 years later in 2015. This final cutscene was unfortunately never finished, but released as a video reward for the most earnest players of Metal Gear Solid V, The Phantom Pain. And the script for this final chapter is a great culmination of everything Kojima had been wrestling with when it came to his father's complex, as the 12-year-old Eli yells at his father,
"You don't get the last word, Father. I'll break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you."
What lies between these two climactic moments of facing the father in 1987 and again in 2015 is an almost 30-year evolution where Kojima slowly transitions from unconsciously embedding his trauma in his stories to very consciously doing it by the end of the series. Even with the next game in line, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake in 1990, Kojima had already begun to let the floodgates of his mind open by letting loose his background in detailed science fiction writing. Dialogue in the second installment was dense, with almost quadruple the amount of script, most of which devoted towards character development, as characters didn't rush their explanations like the first game, leaving plenty of room for them to rant about their motives and backstories. In the second game, Hideo resurrected Big Boss, only to burn him alive yet again at the end of the story. But while the Big Boss of the second installment would only have a limited amount of screen time compared to the first, he was a significantly more realized character, and even more reminiscent of Kojima's father, in that while recognizing the suffering war brings, also believed in the purpose it gave to soldiers like himself. "You and me, though of rare value on the battlefield, are just useless dummies back home. We belong on the battlefield. We'll stay there until we die miserably." To Big Boss, purpose was only truly felt on the battlefield, and so at the heart of his perceived villainy was really a desire to continue the cycle of war so that he and his fellow soldiers would always have a sense of purpose. And by using the nuclear weapon Metal Gear, Big Boss sought to spread chaos across the globe, breeding even more conflict and, in turn, more purpose. The very function of Big Boss's fortresses were designed to be a nation for soldiers, a haven harboring the war spirit. But curiously, at the same time as all of this, Kojima also began imbuing Big Boss with his father's kindness component, found in his backstory from when he rescued children in the midst of war. When Snake talks to the character Grey Fox right before the final Big Boss encounter, Fox explains that, "I am unlike you, in an awkward position. Big Boss might have been only a supervisor to you, but he saved my life, twice, long before I joined his troop. But he helped me out of that living hell, like the children here." And so while being a fortress designed to give soldiers purpose, it's also a refuge for the children and orphans of war. And this is the Big Boss curse, the tension that exists between purpose and kindness, or in other words, war and hero. Because while heroism breeds purpose, there's no hero without conflict. And this theme would be explored in further depth in Kojima's next installment, Metal Gear Solid in 1998. In this story, Kojima really doubled down on this big boss curse, as he wrote characters that sat on either side of the dichotomy. On one hand, the new antagonist, Liquid Snake, was in a way the new big boss, as he sought to carry out the late big boss's great dream of seeing a world in conflict.
What are you really after?
A world where warriors like us are honored as we once were, as we should be.
That was Big Boss's fantasy.
It was his dying wish. When he was young, during the Cold War, the world needed men like us. We were valued then. We were desired. But things are different now. We're losing our place in a world that no longer needs us. A world that now spurns our very existence. After I launch this weapon and get our $1 billion, we'll be able to bring chaos and honor back to this world gone soft.
It's here in the youth of the series that Kojima performed an important story surgery by retconning some of the relationships. While Big Boss had taken the role of the figurative parent in Metal Gear 1 in guiding Snake through his challenges, Kojima made Big Boss Snake's literal parent in Metal Gear Solid.
Big Boss.
Towards the end of the story, Snake learns that he, alongside Liquid Snake, are the clones of Big Boss. Having been part of a genetic experiment, the US military performed with the purpose of using Big Boss's DNA to generate a series of super soldiers. They are the Twin Snakes.
So that's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Love? It's hate! He always told me I was inferior, and now I'll have my revenge! You should understand me, brother. You killed our father with your own hands! You stole my chance for revenge! Now I'll finish the work that father began. I will surpass him! I will destroy him!
And so Liquid's goal, despite Big Boss, was to destroy his father's legacy by finally achieving what Big Boss could not: use Metal Gear to spread chaos across the globe. For Liquid, this was his destiny, passed down through his father's genes.
All living things are born for the sole purpose of passing on their parents' genes. That's why I'll follow what my genes tell me. And then I'm going to go beyond, in order to break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you.
In the Metal Gear Solid supporting document titled Classified, Kojima explains that this exploration of fate, or rather genetic determinism, was at the heart of the story. In regards to the theme of the story, the idea is destiny implanted into our genes. Continuing with, to make the theme easy to understand, I created a story in which all the characters, including Solid Snake, Liquid Snake, and other genome soldiers, are bound by their genes, and everything is focused towards that. When looking at the Twin Snakes, we can see how Kojima placed both Liquid and Solid Snake on either side of this belief. On one hand was Liquid, who leaned into his fate, and on the other was Solid Snake, who spent the entire story wrestling with the decision to either accept his fate or to rebel against it. Or in Kojima's own words, imagine there is a child who isn't good at sports, and their parents aren't good at sports either. On sports day, if the child tells their parents they don't want to participate, parents will think, well, it can't be helped. They are my son after all. But if playing Metal Gear Solid makes them reconsider and think, I'll try my best to participate in sports day, then that is the desired result. Simply put, at the heart of Metal Gear Solid was a message about rebellion, about not submitting to the destiny suggested by your lineage, but choosing your own path.
You mustn't allow yourself to be chained to fate, to be ruled by your genes. Humans can choose the type of life they want to live. The important thing is that you choose life. And then live.
Snake!
And in the end, Kojima's rebellion narrative was the victor, as Solid Snake chose his own path and Liquid Snake was destroyed, and in turn, Big Boss's legacy. But this was only one half of the story. Contrasting Big Boss's legacy for war was the other side of Kojima's complex, stories about kindness. Characters like Naomi Hunter and Sniper Wolf, both characters dedicated to destroying Snake, were children saved by Big Boss.
I was born on the battlefield, but then he appeared. My hero. Saladin.
Sniper Wolf confesses that Big Boss brought her out of suffering after her family was killed in Iraq and refers to Big Boss as Saladin, a famous 12th century Kurdish governor who was praised for both his military skills and his generosity and chivalry.
I was in Mozambique when he came.
You mean Big Boss?
And through a series of twists, Snake learned that Naomi Hunter, the operation's medical advisor, was the adopted sister of Grey Fox, and as a starving orphan, was rescued and brought to America by Big Boss. And it's here where we begin to observe another pattern in the types of characters that Hideo is drawn to writing: orphans. And when tracking this trend, it's shocking just how many characters follow this pattern, where everyone has an incredibly troubling backstory about the death of their parents.
Fox, stay out of this. What about Naomi? She's hell-bent on taking revenge for you.
Naomi?
You're the only one who can stop her.
No, I can't.
Why?
Because I'm the one who killed her parents.
Grey Fox, who as we've learned was an orphan rescued by Big Boss, turns up in Metal Gear Solid and explains that he was the one to kill Naomi's parents and has carried that guilt ever since.
I always dreamed of becoming a soldier, but I was wrong. It wasn't really my dream. My father, he was killed in action when I was younger.
You wanted to follow in your father's footsteps?
Not really. I thought that if I became a soldier, I could understand him better.
Meryl, who talks about her father being dead.
When I came to, the village was engulfed in flames.
Are you saying that you burned your village down to bury your past?
I see that you have suffered the same trauma.
The Russian psychic Psycho Mantis, who after using his telepathy to peek into his father's mind, burned his entire village down, killing both his parents. Hal and Emma Emmerich, whose father committed suicide. Olga, whose father was shot by Revolver Ocelot, as well as Fortune's father, who died in the same incident. Vamp, as Solid Snake explains, when he was just a kid, he lost his family to a terrorist bomb that went off in a church they were attending. Colonel Volgin, who killed his own father, as explained by Kojima himself in the Snake Eater commentary. The Boss, whose father was killed off when she was just a child. And the Beasts of Metal Gear Solid 4, who, as is revealed upon defeating them, were soldiers who had suffered PTSD caused by the death of their parents. There's undeniably a pattern here in the types of characters Hideo is drawn to writing, and there's hints scattered throughout interviews where Kojima, although still having a mother, talks about himself having no parents.
僕親父が中2の時に亡くなりまして、で、誰に相談することもできずですね。いろんな局面で進学とか就職とかもっといろんなことはもっと言うとその恋愛とかも含めてね。でそういう時に当然友達もいますし、先輩もいますし、学校の先生もいますし、親もいますけど。
It's unclear why Kojima takes the stance of not having parents to turn to while his mother was still alive, but it is clear that a bitterness existed because of this. And it's this bitterness that he would examine in his next major title, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. In the Metal Gear Solid 2 document titled Metal Gear Solid Chronicle, Kojima explains that the reason I make games basically comes from the idea that long ago, older generations would recount various tales to children about their experiences. Those kids could then go on to take these stories and use them as their own myths and fables to carry forward, leading to parents who might warn their kids about a so-called monster that might rip their tongue out. These days, those kinds of people are disappearing though, aren't they? No one at school nor home is telling these stories. Everything I was taught I learned from manga, anime, and movies, both good and bad things. Ultimately, this theme of those in power not passing down important cultural stories was at the core of Sons of Liberty. While Metal Gear Solid 1 examined themes of genetic information and the rebellion against genetic determinism, Metal Gear Solid 2 explored the effects of censorship and the responsibility given to those in a position to pass down stories to future generations. In order to explore this theme, Kojima introduced a new type of antagonist, the secret organization, the Patriots.
The Patriots?
The truth behind this country. I'm not surprised you've never heard of them. Very few are aware of their existence, even among those with code word clearance.
Huh?
Politics, the military, the economy, they control it all. They even choose who becomes president. Putting it simply, the Patriots rule this country.
In the end, it was discovered that the Patriots wasn't a human-controlled initiative, but an AI system, whose plan was to censor the flow of specific digital information to the public, all in the name of peace. To Kojima, who clearly placed importance on the passing down of cultural stories, the Patriots' AI system was to be destroyed, and he would do this through a new father and son relationship, Jack, aka Raiden, and Solidus Snake, the story's appointed bad guy who, as we learned around the story's halfway point, was the third clone of Big Boss alongside Liquid and Solid Snake.
So you're the boss around here?
No, not just around here. I'm the boss to surpass Big Boss himself.
Solidus Snake was the new father figure on the block who, in his quest to surpass Big Boss, sought to destroy the Patriots, not in the name of freedom, but in order to make sure his war hero legacy was remembered.
All I want is to be remembered by other people, by history. The Patriots are trying to protect their power, their own interests, by controlling the digital flow of information. I want my memory, my existence to remain.
And then we had Raiden, the latest of Kojima's orphan characters and the new rookie operative. Around the halfway point, Raiden remembered that Solidus Snake was his adopted father, having rescued him after the death of his parents. On the surface, Kojima had once again embedded his father's kindness component into the father figure. But unfortunately, it's here where things begin to unravel, as the illusion of this kindness is stripped away, revealing its true face: indoctrination.
Everything you know, you learn from me.
As is revealed, Solidus Snake did indeed rescue Raiden when he was a child, but only to train him in the ways of war.
You were one of the best among the child soldiers that fought in that conflict. When you were barely 10 years old, you became the platoon leader of the small boy unit. At the time, your outstanding kill record earned you several nicknames, including White Devil and Jack the Ripper. Jack, I was your godfather. I named you.
For Kojima, this kind of indoctrination is familiar. Again, in the Metal Gear document Shedding, Hideo recalls how his own father, obsessed with the Navy, trained his children in the ways of the military. When I was a child, I was made to sing military songs in the bathroom. If I didn't sing, I was beaten up. We had a book of military songs and he made us sing them one by one.
Look at that jam bastard!
When my brother reported that he had seen Charlton Heston's Midway by himself, Dad struck him, saying, "Why would you watch a movie where the Japanese Navy loses?"
We were shown Hollywood action films every day. The kind with macho guys and big guns. They call it image training. They built us from the ground up into killing machines. We were fed once a day. I can still taste the gunpowder they mixed into the food.
Unfortunately, this is the real truth behind a Big Boss's kindness towards children, to train them into soldiers. And we can see that Hideo had been working on this since Metal Gear 2. As Big Boss explained to Solid Snake, "You've seen those children, victims of war from many nations, and budding soldiers for the next war. Ploy, assist, make victims, nurse, and train, and back to the battlefield again. Conflicts will never die in this world." And so the character of Raiden was a victim in more ways than one. While his backstory involved being indoctrinated into the ways of war, during the events of Sons of Liberty, he would find himself caught in a web designed by the Patriots, as they weaponized the flow of information to train him once again to be the perfect soldier. In the end, Raiden's great challenge, just like Solid Snake before him, was to reject the role laid out for him, and ultimately take responsibility for his own story.
By the way, Jack, I was the one who killed your parents.
And in the end, as per Kojima's patricide mission, the father and all the corruption he stood for is indeed killed at the hands of his adopted son, Raiden.
I know you didn't have much in terms of choices this time. But everything you felt, thought about during this mission is yours. And what you decide to do with them is your choice.
You mean start over?
Yeah, a clean slate, a new name, new memories. Choose your own legacy. It's for you to decide.
At this point in Kojima's creative and reflective journey, it's clear that he wanted his protagonists to escape the cages of fate they found themselves trapped in. But an important element was missing. At this point, so much corruption infected Kojima's fictional world that it became necessary to establish once again a north-pointing star, a true moral compass the heroes could align to. And Kojima would do this by introducing, for the first time ever, a mother figure.
I didn't raise you and shape you into the man you are today, just so we could face each other in battle.
これまで不正のドラマばっかりを作ってきましたんで、ここで母性のドラマを作ってみようかなっていうことで、今回はその父親じゃなくて母親としての存在、なので、ザ・ボスは女性というようなことになりました。
For Snake Eater, Kojima turned back the clock and set this new story in the past, with the rise of Big Boss himself during the height of the Cold War. When examining the story through the lens of Hideo trying to eradicate Big Boss and who he represents, there's a surprising amount of grace given to his character development. And it might be because Kojima, at this point in his development, began to examine not the father figure himself, but the systems behind the war economy.
Haven't you heard of the philosophers?
In Snake Eater, there is much dialogue dedicated to the philosophers, the initial version of the Patriots, who are revealed in the end to be the ones responsible for the current conflict.
The philosophers of today have no sense of good or evil. Their influence extends to countries and organizations involved in every aspect of every war. They have become war itself.
But fighting all of this was the daughter of the now deceased group of men and war hero, the Boss, who sought to undo the damage done by her father.
Boss, why are you doing this?
Why? To make the world one again. The world used to be whole. But with the end of the Second World War, the philosophers began to fight amongst themselves, and the world was torn apart.
To Kojima, the Boss was the only true hero, a character dedicated to setting the world right, free from the grip of her father's corruption and free from the grip of the system. But Kojima wouldn't stop there. In order to elevate her above everyone else, he made her an astronaut. In his own book, The Creative Gene, Kojima describes astronauts as being the heroes above any other, having witnessed the moon landing event in real time in 1969, Kojima only 6 back then.
That's one small step for man.
While never going into space himself, he would take this love for space travel and redirect it into the Boss.
The government wanted human data, so they secretly decided to send a human being into space. I was the one they chose.
In his fictional universe, the Boss was the first woman astronaut and would use this as a way to establish the Boss's personal belief system.
I could see the planet as it appeared from space. That's when it finally hit me. Space exploration is nothing but another game in the power struggle between the US and the USSR. Politics, economics, the arms race, they're all just arenas for meaningless competition. A world without communism or capitalism, that is the world I wanted to see.
But unfortunately, in order to embed her moral compass into the DNA of the series, she was sacrificed, killed at the hands of none other than her figurative son, Naked Snake, aka Big Boss. Both in the Metal Gear Solid book simply titled R, named for its collection of R-related themes found across the series, and in Hideo Kojima's Snake Eater commentary also found in the Extreme DVD box set. Hideo explains in relation to this final scene between Snake and the boss, I had decided on a flower field as the stage for the final battle between Snake and the boss since the very beginning, because the flower field is the place where life cycles. Plants to create the next generation, blossom flowers and seeds, then dies, and the seeds grow in the same location, and the entire thing begins again. This cycle mirrors the relationship between the boss and Snake. If we were to give an R-related theme to Metal Gear Solid 3, it would perhaps be renewal, as both Kojima and his characters began to use these new seeds planted by the boss to start again and grow. But the scene of a flower field wouldn't be the last time Hideo would use nature as an important story-building motif. During the mid-2000s, Hideo began to examine the fascination he had with the sun and its symbolism. In 2003, right before the release of Snake Eater, he released another game on Game Boy Advance called In Boktai, we saw a lot of similar themes to Metal Gear Solid, and Hideo himself opens up about also embedding some of his father in the game as well. The story itself is quite heavy. I mean, the hero wears a crimson scarf that's been dyed in the blood of his old man. Continuing with, nowadays, I think people are forgetting the sun. It's not on our minds. When I was a kid, we had the Tower of the Sun, Teru Okamoto's famous art sculpture. Then there was Shintaro Ishihara's book, Season of the Sun, and also the movie Purple Noon. My generation was awash in sun imagery.
Remember the sun being so flat.
And this fascination with the sun would be a major motif in Metal Gear Solid 4, as each chapter would combine the word sun with one of the codenames of Big Boss's clones.
It's time you let her go outside.
But the sun in Metal Gear Solid 4 wasn't just used for its name alone, but what it represents. Being outside.
Outside.
At this point in Hideo's creative and personal journey, he begins to acknowledge not just the feelings he felt of being trapped with his earlier explorations of genetic determinism and cultural stories, but the design of the cage itself. Hideo, much like Solid Snake, was trapped inside a cage of his father's making, always battling to get outside. He hated it from the inside.
Trapped inside the same cage.
In Metal Gear Solid 4, Kojima explored what it would truly take to get outside the cage, and he did this by introducing a unique child character into his universe.
Sonny, we'll eat them later, okay?
Uncoincidentally named Sonny, the latest orphan character being raised by Otacon and Solid Snake himself. Sonny, being the daughter of the late Olga, who was an orphan herself, is a child who has never known life outside the cage of war. Like Kojima himself, their home is in the computer.
She can only see the outside from the inside. She's always in there, searching for herself, searching for her family. She's trying to find out who she is and where she's going.
For Kojima, it was time to get out. It was time to finally put this war and this revenge mission behind him. And he attempted to do this by designing a scenario where the only way to get outside was to destroy the system from the only vantage point available to him, the inside.
Follow me. I'll explain everything.
When it came to building the plot, Kojima split his father in two again and embedded on one side the desire for a battlefield into Big Boss, and on the other the misguided view of kindness into Big Boss's ex-commander-in-chief, Major Zero.
Zero.
The founder of the Patriots.
Both these characters, who had been inspired by the boss's dream of seeing a unified world, set off to achieve this goal, but
They both misinterpreted her will.
while Big Boss attempted to unite the world by covering the Earth in conflict, Zero sought unity through the suppression of emotion and the censorship of information, as it's revealed that he himself was the one behind the Patriots AI system.
Zero's goal was to achieve a unity of thought and awareness. He believed that was what the boss wanted. He was obsessed with controlling awareness on the inside from the outside.
And this was the conflict at hand. With Big Boss seemingly dead, Major Zero's oppression through the Patriots AI system had increased, controlling soldiers and keeping the war economy thriving.
Good luck finding a way to access the Patriots AIs from the outside. It's absolutely impossible. No chance in hell. Like I said, there's no breaking into those AIs from the outside.
That's why we need to destroy GW from the inside before attacking Haven itself.
To fully disable the Patriots and their control, Snake must inject the system with a virus from inside the computer itself.
We did it!
And after an epic struggle, Snake succeeds and injects the AI system with a virus developed by Sunny on her computer, no less, ultimately destroying the Patriots and in turn, the cage around Snake and Sunny and the rest of the heroes. After everything, they were finally outside.
Sunny, it's okay if you want to live outside now. It's your life. There are other havens out there.
The sun looks so pretty.
Sunny,
I like it outside.
No need for you to go just yet.
But even with this cathartic finale, Kojima wasn't done. Right at the end of the story, Kojima brings back Big Boss for one final conversation with Snake.
Let it go, my son.
This time, Solid Snake wouldn't kill Big Boss directly, but indirectly, as Snake's biological virus he had been carrying all this time would affect Big Boss, deteriorating him down to nothing. Snake would still kill the boss.
You erased me 2 times before. Today will mark the 3rd.
But in an act of grace, Kojima appeared to redeem Big Boss himself, giving him dialogue where he acknowledged that he was wrong to try and change the world through war.
Boss, you were right. It's not about changing the world. It's about doing our best to leave the world the way it is. It's about respecting the will of others and believing in your own. Isn't that what you fought for? The boss and I may have chosen different paths, but in the end, we were both trapped inside the same cage. But you have been given freedom. Freedom to be outside.
After Big Boss's true and final death, Kojima makes sure his motif of finally being outside the cage isn't misunderstood by writing a conversation between Snake and Otacon that acknowledged this very thing.
you said it yourself, Snake. There's nothing inside you can pass on to the next generation. No genes, no memes. You're man-made. You're a beast.
I know. A blue rose. There won't be any happy Beauty and the Beast ending for me. What little time I have left will be spent living as a beast. A shadow of the inside, of the old age.
Exactly.
Continuing the R pattern here, there's no question that Metal Gear Solid 4 is about redemption, where all the characters, including Kojima himself, finally break free from their cages and begin anew.
Come quick! They're ready! They look yummy! Sort of like the sun. It's rising again.
Of course, I am talking about Hideo Kojima, the creator of Metal Gear Solid and tonight's industry icon.
But this begs the question. If this is the story that sees himself and Solid Snake finally break free, what then is left for Kojima to explore? What then is Metal Gear Solid V, The Phantom Pain, Kojima's final installment, all about? Why are we still here?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer. Every night, I can feel my leg, and my arm, even my fingers. The body I've lost, the comrades I've lost. Stop hurting. It's like they're all still there.
In interviews, Kojima acknowledges that the theme of Metal Gear Solid V Phantom Pain is revenge, and it certainly seems that way after Big Boss's first mother base was destroyed in the prologue, Ground Zeroes, leaving a lot of the main characters disabled. For this revenge narrative, Kojima called upon his love for novels, and named his protagonists Ahab and Ishmael, characters from the classic revenge story Moby Dick.
You can call me Ishmael.
With Ahab's whaling ship, Pequod, also making an appearance.
This is Pequod, on station at LZ.
In MGS-V, Kojima once again looked backwards and set the story during the Cold War in 1984 and the continued rise of Big Boss himself. Here, everything you'd come to expect from Big Boss as a character was present. The desire for purpose, developing a safe haven for soldiers, rescuing orphans of war but only to indoctrinate them into the ways of the soldier.
What you thinking, boss?
I'm thinking that he's tougher than he looks. With a little training, he'll make himself useful.
George Orwell's 1984 and its messaging about societal control was present in MGS-V as well, with Big Boss is watching you posters popping up at certain points in the story. And William Golding's Lord of the Flies, a story about mob mentality and the loss of innocence, is also called upon to build the mythology surrounding the character of 12-year-old Eli, who was guessed early on to be the young Liquid Snake. And it's here where the father and son relationship was once again established, as Liquid is of course the clone of Big Boss.
I'm not like you! Goodbye, father. I don't need you anymore.
But while all these classic Metal Gear elements were present, something was different.
I did it! Revenge!
The supposed revenge narrative didn't feel convincing, leaving a large chunk of the community wondering if something else was afoot. Communities weren't satisfied. In the Japanese Phantom Pain novelization, Kojima writes down one of his very last ever commentaries on the series. Here, he is at his most reflective, having just spent 28 years examining his own trauma and pouring it into his stories. This work is a story about people who have lost their companions and their past. They vow revenge and try to take back the things they've lost. But as the story enters the middle stage, the more they try to take back, the more they lose everything. Those who assembled for revenge are lost one by one. That is to say, by the chain of revenge, in the end, nothing is left. This work is not a phantom pain, but is a story of loss. At this point in his career, Hideo had come to an important realization, in that while busy building stories to destroy the father, had ironically used the battlefield to build up his own war legend as a renowned video game director, and in a way, had become a big boss himself. This is what his dialogue in Metal Gear Solid 4 had been about.
You're man-made. You're a beast.
Everyone is copying you. Everyone is thinking they want to become you. A legendary mercenary, a great person of legend. People trying to become Big Boss, or possibly to become the Snake of Hatred as a demon of revenge. And so it seems that Metal Gear Solid V was Hideo's attempt to set himself free from this new Cage, his own legacy. And he would do this by revealing at the very end of the story that the characters weren't who the players thought they were. In the great twist of V, it's revealed that Ahab, the character of Big Boss, isn't the real Big Boss after all, but a doppelganger who had their likeness changed to resemble Big Boss after the explosion. The name Ahab should have given it away, as the name in Hebrew means brother of the father.
This story, this legend, it's ours. We can change the world and with it the future.
And so the real Big Boss, the character that players had become attached to after all these years, and the character Hideo now associated with himself, had been absent from the story all along. And this revelation left behind a feeling of emptiness, a void, if you will, where that feeling of wholeness and satisfaction should be. But this might have just been the point. In one of Kojima's own tweets, he writes, V liberates Snake from the bonds of fate, and by passing the baton to the player, who was previously bound to Snake, they can bring the legend full circle. This parting of ways should not become some phantom pain, but a void that, by remaining unfilled, serves as motivation for the player to move forward. And so perhaps the real theme of the phantom pain wasn't revenge, but reflection, the hardest task a human can undertake, because it's only through reflection can one understand their own pain for what it truly is. Only then can you move forward. By removing Big Boss from the story entirely and allowing players to connect with a character with no name, Hideo had severed his ties to his own war legend and allowed the player to take over.
From here on out, you're Big Boss.
But it's also clear that he had also reflected on his own void left by his father, with language like parting of ways, void, remaining unfilled, and moving forward. It's clear now that while the main plot of Phantom Pain looked like characters getting revenge, it was really a commentary by Kojima about how revenge doesn't work. Killing the father never worked. And with this new understanding, Hideo had only one thing left to do.
You don't get the last word, Father. I'll break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you!
At the very end of the story, Kojima organizes the pieces once again to resemble his patricide mission.
You're one hell of a soldier.
The father and son face each other in battle.
I will kill you!
And once again, the son points the gun at the father. But this time, something is different. After 28 years, the son doesn't kill the father. And so V marked the true parting of ways between Kojima and the Cage. While Metal Gear Solid 4 had been a story about redemption, Kojima's last story was one that proved he was no longer bound to the perimeters his father had placed on him. You are the sun. If you look straight at it, your eyes are crushed. But listen, you who are called the sun, soon you must absolutely set. Anywhere is fine. Go shine over there now. Illuminate the world over there. That is your role. And so as the Metal Gear series came to a close, so too did Kojima's revenge mission against his father. When examining the themes of the Metal Gear Solid games in its entirety, we begin to recognize that each installment was a personal milestone for Kojima as he navigated his own way through his trauma. First was rebellion against his fate passed down through his father's genes.
It's for you to decide.
Then came the examination of responsibility in passing on stories to future generations.
To make the world one again.
A renewal where he began to shape his own belief system worth fighting for.
Outside.
Redemption as he chose forgiveness and finally exited the cage.
You're big boss.
And lastly, reflection as Kojima looked inwards and rose above his own legacy, severing the ties between himself and his own war legend. The sun had set on this long journey through his father's complex, and what remained was the same void, unchanged. But by the end, Kojima had learned that the void couldn't be filled with revenge, but was to be accepted for what it was. And through acceptance, he could finally move on. In the MGS-V novelization, Kojima's very last sentence sums up both his entire personal journey as well as the entire Metal Gear series. There is a void, but it will not be filled. In that void, there is always a hero. Because there is a void, you can advance ahead. Hi everybody, and thank you so much for watching this episode on Metal Gear Solid. My name is Jarvis Sterrett and I go by the name Good Blood on YouTube and the internets. One of my great joys is bringing together so many different filmmaking disciplines when it comes to art and animation and cinematography. So creating an episode like this where I can bring all these things together is a real joy for me, and to be able to write it and research it. I'll be doing a director's commentary on Patreon as well, which I think might be interesting for those who are fascinated by behind the scenes content and how I went about researching creating this piece. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.